This is a test for planning committee.
Good morning and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Planning Committee, which takes place from the Walton Suite in Winchester Guildhall. It's Wednesday the 15th of August 2023 and the time is 9:30. My name is Councillor Jane Rutter and I'm Chair of the Planning Committee. To my right is Councillor Edwards, who's the Vice Chair. Around the table we have the other elected members of the committee and we are supported today by a number of officers. Lorna Hutchins and Simon Avery from the planning team, Daniel Lucas, our legal advisor. The case officers will be sitting here and they change with each item. And Claire Buchanan on my right from Democratic Services, who supports the committee and who operates the recording equipment. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn this on is set out on our website. Please can I remind everyone to ensure their mobile phones and other electronic equipment is on silent or turned off entirely, please. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Please look at the handout provided on your chairs or the information slides displayed as you walked in and during the breaks for further guidance about this meeting. Firstly, I'd like to welcome members of the public to the meeting. Those of you who have registered to speak, I will invite you forward when it is time for you to make your contribution. The microphone is turned on by pressing the button on the base of the unit, and a timer will appear on the screen to remind you of how much time you have remaining. Let's now turn to the agenda. Claire, do we have apologies and deputy members, please?
We do, Chairman. So apologies for absence received from Councillor Small, with Councillor Williams deputising. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Councillor Williams. I think this is your first planning committee, isn't it? Excellent, well done. And are there any disclosures of interest, members? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to agenda item 7, I should declare that I'm the ward councillor. I live within a few hundred metres of the site, and I know it well, and I was not able to attend the site visit held before this meeting. However, additionally, I wish to declare a non-prejudicial interest just for the avoidance of doubt. In the summer of 2022, I was invited to a meeting at the college with other ward councillors. We heard about the college's various plans for the future, and the discussion touched upon the potential for girls' boarding houses. We went into no detail. This was, of course, substantially before the submission of this application, and I have had no further discussions or contact with the college on the matter since.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Williams.
Yes, it's for item 9 on the agenda as ward councillor. However, no resident has previously discussed the item with me beforehand.
That's clear. Thank you very much. Any others? No? Lovely. Thank you very much. The minutes of the previous meeting on pages 9 to 16 of your agenda pack, are those agreed as a correct record? Agreed. Thank you. And finally, we want to accept the update sheet as an addendum to the report. Is that agreed? Thank you. We now move on to the first planning application. Which is item number 6 on your agenda, which is at Kingsgate Park. It is reference number 22/02812/FUL, and it is, of course, at Winchester College. Catherine Watson, you are the presenting officer. Would you like to give us your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. The application is for the construction of 2 girls' boarding houses for sixth form girls and a new all-weather sports pitch. Here we can see the site outlined in yellow. And here we can see the existing site plan. So we can see the tree belt around the site and the existing all-weather sports pitch. And to the bottom, we've got Antrim House, which also forms part of the application. And at the top, we've got Chernock House, which is Grade 2 listed. Here we have the proposed site plan. So on the left-hand side, we can see the layout of the boarding houses. It's in an S shape. And then on the right-hand side is where the new all-weather sports pitch will be located. Here we've got an illustrative landscaping master plan. So again, it shows the existing trees, paths that will go through the site, some new trees where adjacent to the boarding houses. And we've got a planting strategy here. So as well as soft landscaping around the boarding houses, again in the area of the new all-weather sports pitch, this just shows some of the planting that will be installed as part of the application. Here we've got trees that to be removed. Those are in the red dotted line. The title of this slide is actually wrong. It's trees, existing trees in green that form part of the protection, that have a reprotection area because they're within the vicinity of the new development. So you can see there's one tree on the northern boundary which will be removed to facilitate the all-weather sports pitch. There are also some trees along the St Cross Road boundary and also the boundary with Antrim House that will also be removed. Here we've got a tree planting strategy. The different colours refer to the species of tree, but as you can see, there's some new trees to the left of the boarding houses, again to the south, and then throughout Kingsgate Park. So here we have the ground floor plan of the boarding houses. So we've got teaching accommodation. In the centre, we've got a single story link, which is for eating and general sort of social space. And we've got courtyards within the S shape for social leisure activities. Here we have the first floor plan. So this is where the student bedrooms are, and also staff apartments. And on the second floor again, we've got a continuation of the bedrooms, students and staff. And here we have the roof plan. Again, we can see the S shape layout of the boarding houses. Antrim House, there'll be new staff accommodation in there. So this just shows on the left-hand side, we've got basement plan, which is sort of got one apartment there. In the middle, we've got the ground floor plan. Again, we've got apartments there, and then on the first floor plan, more apartments for staff. So here we have the boarding house elevations. So at the top, we have got the north side. So this is what faces out of Kingsgate Park towards Romans Road. So you can see on this little inset, we've got the red line denoting the northern elevation. On the bottom, this is the elevation that faces into Kingsgate Park. So again, we've got another red line just along here, which sort of can orientate you as to where that is in the plot. Here at the top, we have got the southern elevation. So you can, that's on the bottom, on the inset, you can just see that line showing where that is. And then on the bottom, we've got the elevation which faces St Cross Road. So again, you can just see where that is in relation to St Cross Road. Antrim House, there's not really going to be any external change other than a new opening for fire exit, new staircase, which is the main change there. And here we have some montages of the elevations facing St Cross Road. So here we can just see approaching from the north towards the boarding houses. And here is what it would look like a bit further along, again heading south. And from one of the new accesses on St Cross Road, you can see where the boarding houses start. And again, this is approaching from the south towards the city centre. This plan shows the all-weather sports pitch on the right-hand side, so you can just see where that, how that relates to Kingsgate Park and the boarding houses. Here we have the pitch line markings. It's a flexible space, so it's for hockey, tennis, football, non-contact rugby, and anything else that you know that there's a need for in terms of pitch sports. Here we have the lighting for the sports pitch, so you can just see where the sports pitch is. There's black dots denote the flood lighting, and that the green dotted line indicates the light spread from the lighting. Obviously, the further out it gets, the less light will be visible in the surrounding area. So here we have an aerial view of the site. So you can see the existing all-weather pitch at the bottom left-hand corner. The sports centre, the development is taking place in this bottom right-hand corner. Antrim House to the bottom left, Chernock House to the bottom right, and the site of the new sports pitch. And again, here we have a view approaching from the south towards Winchester. The access here is for Antrim House, and the site is a little further down, but it just shows the trees and the boundary wall. Here are some photos into the site. So on the left is Chernock House. Behind that you can just about see the temporary sports centre. And then one of the new access will be around here. And then again, looking directly into the site. So on the right, we've got Antrim House. Again, you can just about see the temporary sports centre. And then this photo is taken further from the north on the approach to the site. So you can see the brick wall along here. There'll be two new accesses into that brick wall. One access for cars coming in, and one for the cars coming out. And this is taken from within the site, so this is just inside the boundary of the wall, the brick wall. This is the existing all-weather sports pitch. And then this is the view towards Romans Road. So Romans Road runs along here. It just shows the trees that are there at present. And then Again, this is along the boundary to St Cross Road, and we can just which is along here, and the boundary with Antrim House on the left hand side, and then the existing sports pitch. And this is a view from Romans Road into the site. So the new sports pitch will be in this sort of area. Boarding houses will be beyond the trees. That ends my presentation. My recommendation is to permit, subject to the conditions and informatives included on my report, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kat. Well, before we have your questions, we're going to have some public speaking. So first of all, we have Ali Dugdale and Caroline Powell, who are objectors. Are they able to come forward? Oh, has it? Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, I've got, yep. Patrick Morton, thank you. And between you, you have 3 minutes. Have you sorted out how you're going to share the 3 minutes? Right, lovely. Well, when you're ready, you know how to switch on the microphones. The timer will start when you start speaking, so you can switch on the microphone whenever you're ready. And when you're ready, we'll listen to you. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Patrick Morton. I live in Edgar Road, directly opposite the proposed development, and I'm representing a number of other residents. We strongly oppose the planning application. In particular, we continue to have concerns regarding the following. Firstly, we understand that there is a statutory presumption against granting planning permission for development, which would harm a heritage asset. However, the planning balance and conclusion does not clearly show what the public benefits are and how or whether these have been considered and weighed up as required under the National Planning Policy Framework. Secondly, the document clearly states that no justification was provided for the proposed 2 new access points onto St Cross Road, which directly contravenes section DM21 and LTP4. We believe that these are both unnecessary and potentially unsafe. In previous conversations with the college bursar, we were assured that the access points would not be used for pupil drop-offs. We now see that the opposite is in fact the case. We also think the college owes a duty of care to its students, and creating 2 new entrances would only serve to allow unwanted intrusions. Thirdly, we were assured by the college that our concern over the use of on-street parking by contractors would be taken into account, but there is no mention of this as a condition in the construction management plan. Finally, given the size, scope and complexity of the proposed development, we are surprised that the section amendments to plans negotiated reads none. This gives the impression that the application was not subjected to a very rigorous examination. Thank you for your attention.
I live at number 95 Edgar Road. The planning department will be well aware of the material factors which must by law form the basis of their decision, to the exclusion of other irrelevant factors appearing in the planning officer's report, however persuasive they may seem. Worryingly, the planning officer's report puts little or no significance on various material factors raised by opponents, such as the right to privacy and not to be overlooked. The rights of the opponents are supported by overarching legislation as well as planning laws. We are all equal before the law. The dangers of a planning officer's report which does not adequately and fairly put the arguments of both sides according to the set principles of materiality are manifest in case law. Much has been made of extant planning permission, and yet I found the applicants' representatives to be evasive on the subject or inconsistent when questioned. The applicant has since failed to communicate with me as requested in response to the applicant's invitation. Other objectors have said they could not get clarity from the planning department. In any event, the case of Hillside Park against Snowdonia National Park Authority 2019 is highly pertinent, and the building of a temporary sports hall and the not insignificant differences between this application and the original application, Antrim House, need to be examined in the light of the principles of this case. Natural England's views should not be discounted lightly. There are alternative sites, as the supporting document application indicates this just happens to be the favoured one. The
You've
applicant
come
has
to the
elect-
end of the time, I'm afraid, so I'm going to have to stop you there. Sorry about that. But if you could just both wait, because members may have questions of clarification for you. Members? Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Could you tell me where exactly Edgar Road is in relation to the all-weather pitch?
Oh, well, it's immediately opposite. It runs parallel to the St Cross Road, and I'm immediately opposite the proposed boarding houses and the.
Just behind the St Cross Road, not directly opposite.
It borders the St Cross Road. The back Edgar Road is at the back of our houses. We're called Edgar. Our address is Edgar Road, but we actually front Edgar Road and the St Cross Road. We straddle two roads.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other questions of clarification? Councillor Lee.
May I ask, are there trees existing that are screening or partially screening yourself from the college site that we're talking about?
Not in front of my house. I have a completely open amenity outlook towards St Catherine's Hill, which is uninterrupted currently.
Right, thank you.
Okay, I think that's the end of questions from members. Thank you both very much. Lee, if you could just switch off the microphone as you return to your seats. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have no parish council representative or ward councillor, but we do have Dr. Tim Hands for the college. If you'd like to come forward, Dr. Hands, welcome. And I think you have Emma Barnett as well, just in case there are any questions at the end. Thank you. And you have 3 minutes, Dr. Hands, when you're ready. I think you know how to switch on the microphone. When you're ready, thank you.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much indeed for allowing me to present. The college. Winchester College is our country's original school. It's the one on which many other UK schools have been based, and indeed schools worldwide. But as you know, the college has not always recognised the allure of modernity. So, 2 years ago, we published a vision for the 21st century. At 2 decades into that century, you might say it was slightly overdue. Schools exist to serve their community. The modern communal trend is away from single-sex education. And we, of course, want to promote social mobility, which is why we've pledged to increase our bursary provision by 25% by 2024. And we're already well over halfway there. Then, at the start of the last academic year, we admitted day pupils and we admitted girls as well. And, you know, so far it's been a huge success. But we lack boarding houses for girls. And until we have them, we will not have equality. William of Wykeham was not just a bishop, but an architect and builder. But the fact is that his college has not built a new boarding house since 1911. So we approached Stanton Williams, Stirling Award-winning architects, and we asked them in particular to focus on sustainability. These boarding houses would meet the BREEAM Excellence standard for energy and water, thus assisting Winchester's ongoing journey towards net zero. But we can always go the extra mile, and the college is already looking at the potential for photovoltaic solar. We also engaged with other schools and with sports clubs, with residents, very helpfully, and with your officers. And we pledge to carry on that process of consultation. This presentation is my penultimate duty as headmaster. A-level results are announced tomorrow, and I then hand over to my successor, Elizabeth Stone, a native of Australia and the college's first female head. I hope you will support this new vision, and that later today I can break the good news to Elizabeth, the good news that at last Winchester College is indeed ready to enter the Stone Age. That will be wonderful news for our wonderful city and our developing school. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hans. Well done for keeping within the time. Members, do we have questions of clarification? If I could kick off, actually, I've got a couple of questions arising from the original objectors' comments. The access onto St Cross Road, the in and out access, on our site visit, which all members who were able to took earlier this week, we were assured that actually that wouldn't be a way that pupils would be dropped off, and that is covered by a movement plan which involves them going and using the new sports hall, car park and so on. Could you just reassure residents that that access is needed but will be rarely used, and why it is going to be used, and also perhaps cover the overlooking and screening by trees questions as well?
Thank you very much. I hope you won't mind, this is pretty complex stuff, and I'm just an English graduate, so if you didn't mind, if I could refer that to Emma, I think I can deal with the screening a little.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just picking up on the access points first. The decision was made to have access from St Cross Road. It's primarily for servicing and deliveries. So at the beginning and end of term and for day pupils, all of those movements will be carried out from the Sports Centre car park. So there'll be very minimal number of vehicle uses of St Cross Road on a day-to-day basis. And as you mentioned earlier, there is a operational management plan which is secured by condition, which requires that pick up and drop off to be as stated in the plan. And the college has made it as inconvenient as possible for parents to do otherwise. So it is, there's a good reason for them to follow that. So I think hopefully residents can be reassured by that. In terms of the need for that entrance, it is an in and out to minimise the loss of trees, providing a turning circle. He just had one entrance in and out. And that is to ensure that the screening provided, the existing tree belt is kept intact as possible, so preventing overlooking issues from residents of St Cross Road. The other point was in terms of overlooking. The scheme has been very carefully designed to minimise overlooking. As you say, the tree belt has been kept as far as possible, with the exception where we have to lose a couple of trees for access. In terms of the overlooking distances, I mean, the buildings themselves are set back 20 metres from St Cross Road, and then there's a further, on the closest properties, all over 40 metres from the windows of the closest property, so window to window. So that is quite a significant distance, and we're pretty confident there'll be no overlooking.
Thank you. Members, questions? Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. Thinking of noise and light harm to the neighbouring residential amenity from the all-weather pitch, how near are the nearest non-college neighbours to the all-weather pitch, particularly the bordering Romans Road and Kingsgate Road?
I don't have precise distances to help, but the surrounding buildings are all college buildings, so it will be some distance.
The answer is the same as the distance to Elder Road, isn't it?
It is
because
probably.
there aren't any other buildings that I'm aware of that are not ours. So
what you're saying is that all of the buildings around the all-weather pitch are owned in the ownership of the college?
That's correct.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. I had a question in regards to the 2 hours provision of hire of the pitches to community, to clubs and sports groups. I was just wondering if the extent would be, as a keen five-side footballer, whether I could, for instance, come to Winchester and hire this out, as how sort of accessible would this hire be to members of the community?
I mean, there is a condition in the report that requires it to be made available for certain hours. It's quite extensive, actually, in the evenings at key times. So I think I haven't got the condition to hand, but
Don't worry, that is conditioned.
yes, it
Yeah,
is
it's
conditioned.
it's
So
in-
there, and then during the weekend, there's also availability, and during the holidays, it's pretty much unlimited. So there's some quite significant community benefit there.
It's better than it might be because we like them to do some work in the evenings and we like them to do things at the weekends. So it's quite a good harmonisation.
Lovely. Any other questions, members? No? Yes, another question, Councillor Williams.
Sorry. Just use the out of term time, the boarding house. Are there plans just to leave it unoccupied? I know the University of Winchester hire it out to sort of visiting, schools from around Europe, etc. Wondering if there's a similar sort of provision there, or whether it would be left empty.
At the moment, it would be left empty because we are having to deal with nitrates and phosphate neutrality, and that's the only way we can get that is by keeping the buildings empty during long-term time.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of references in the letters of objection which refer to Kingsgate Park and suggest that it was at some point a public facility. I understand that the land is owned by the college, and I don't believe there are any public rights of way. I just wonder if you could clarify those points, but also say whether at any time in its history this land was effectively used as a public open space.
Do you know?
I don't know. It's an extremely good question. I'm very, very doubtful that it's ever been a public area. And we must have the documentation. But the idea that it could be a public park, I think that would be impossible. But look, I can't be on oath about it, I'm afraid.
I don't think that is the case. I mean, I think if you look at the heritage statement, they go back to when I think it was former fields or kind of orchards or something,
Yes.
and then it was bought by the college. For sports provision. So I don't believe it has ever been a public park in that sense.
Thank you, that's very clear.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, and since that boarding house that's next to it was put up, it's inconceivable that it would have had public access. So that's 1911.
Thank you both very much indeed. If you could switch off your microphones and return to your seats. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you. Okay, Kat, we return to you now. Do you want to add anything to your presentation following the public contributions?
Thank you, Chair. I can clarify on the open space issue. So although Kingsgate Park is privately owned, it is identified in the council's open space strategy as being public open space, because the college allows local clubs to hire the facilities at certain times of day, although that's quite limited at present. And we have got a policy, DM5, which covers public open space. However, because and that policy sort of precludes development unless there's exceptional circumstances. Because although the all-weather pitch is being lost, there's an improved, larger all-weather pitch as part of the development, and the council's open space officer concluded that then there is no loss of public open space, and in fact there's a gain. So that was deemed to be acceptable.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, members. Now, this is quite a long report. A lot of information from our consultees to begin with, and then we get to the principle of development, I think on page 42. Yes, so I'm going to take questions on all of the report up to page 46, which covers the principle of development and the impact and on the character and appearance of the area. So questions on those sections and the sort of pre-information as well, previous applications and so on that have a bearing on this one. Any questions to our officer? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I wasn't able to attend the site meeting. I had another important engagement. It's referring to page 43, second paragraph, which refers to the floodlighting. The fact that the floodlighting is within a conservation area, I feel a little perturbed about, are these going to be directional floodlights and not just an open glare of white light?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. They will be directional floodlights. I haven't included it on the presentation because it's quite a complicated plan, but plans were submitted as part of the application, which shows the isolux levels, so the spread of the light as you get further and further away from the floodlights, and that is contained within a very small area immediately around the pitch. So I'm confident, and in fact our historic environment officer and our environmental protection officers were confident that there wouldn't be, also our ecologists were confident that there wouldn't be any significant light spill that might either affect wildlife or local neighbours in terms of light spill disturbance. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Kath. And I do believe that we've conditioned quite strict time limits on when those floodlights can be used.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
I think that's number 7 on page 60, is it?
Yes, I think so.
Questions? More questions? Councillor Lee.
Yes, I'm looking at page 34, relating to traffic movements and so on. I'm trying to reconcile a couple of things in my mind, which I hope you can help me with. The Winchester Movement Strategy obviously aspires to have less car traffic, better air quality, walking, cycling. Yes, I can see what the highways have said. And I just wonder, you know, given worst case scenario of 67 additional vehicle movements and so on, have we done adequate air quality mitigation statements and assessments to satisfy ourselves that the worst case is not worse than we think? Thank you.
Microphone, Kat, sorry.
Sorry. An air quality assessment was undertaken because the site is within Winchester, which is a designated air quality control area. That was submitted to our environmental protection officers, and they were happy that that dealt adequately with any potential impact on air quality caused by the development. Thank you, Chair.
Questions? Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. Kath, there's an issue with the High Hampshire Highway Section 106 requirement for a contribution to a new zebra crossing across St. Cross Road due to the increased student footfall.
Thank you, Chair. Part of the application was long discussions with Hampshire Highways on both the applicant side and on the council side to understand their comments, requesting this £150,000 mitigation sum for improvements to pedestrian crossings, etc. The council consulted Daniel as our lawyer, and we didn't consider that the Hampshire County Council highways, we didn't consider that their request was reasonable. The reason for this was that in our opinion it wasn't proportionate or directly linked to the development in hand. The Winchester Movement Strategy is a general council-wide strategy to improve pedestrian and cycle provision in the city. But it's not an adopted supplementary planning document. It's not gone through scrutiny as any such document would be if it was a planning document, and therefore we considered that that held little weight, and that the county in their response referred to the Winchester Movement Strategy as their primary reason for requesting this amount. So we applied the test, the condition test. Is it reasonable? Is it fair? Is it necessary? And we didn't consider that in this instance it was reasonable for the reasons I've just stated. And also pages 56 and 57 go into a bit more detail on that. But that was the council's planning authority's conclusion on that. Thank you.
Councillor Cunningham.
Follow up. So, Kath, can you tell me then in which direction the students will be walking or cycling to and from the proposed boarding houses to the other college facilities for lessons, study periods and sports activities?
Thank you, Chair. The majority of pedestrian movements, as you'll see, if I just go back to this plan, and has already been stated by Dr. Hans, the majority of the college's boarding houses and teaching accommodation run along Kingsgate Road and also Romans Road. So the majority of pupils would not really have any need to cross St Cross Road, as there aren't any teaching facilities on that side of the road. You probably know Kingsgate Road quite well. There's pavements, there's opportunity for cycle movements to and from town when students want to go there. So we considered in this case that, you know, very few pupils would be likely to use St Cross Road to go over to the other side because there's no college facilities there. And so in this case there wouldn't be a significant highway safety risk, which actually the county agreed with us on that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was looking for the full council motion, which was passed in January, to protect our local rivers and waterways by taking account of the cumulative impact of pollution, including sewage discharge. I didn't find it, but I then went on to try and reconcile what Southern Water said and what the officers have put together. And I just wonder whether we have adequate transparency set against the motion in those respects. The motion, as you know, talks about nitrates, phosphates, microplastics, pharmaceuticals, and multiple sewage discharge events, especially the consideration of cumulative impacts to protect our local rivers and waterways. Now, I can see the nutrients and phosphates are well covered. I'm just concerned that we may not have full transparency yet. The all-weather pitch is, I believe, going to be plastic-based. I'm hoping the sustainable drainage systems will capture any release into the environment with respect to that. So my question is, are we clear that we have sufficient transparency with respect to the motion to protect our waterways and the cumulative impact?
Thank you for that question. Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. When we consulted Southern Water, we asked the question about the instances of sewage releases into the Itchen, water quality, etc. They weren't able to provide that information, but it's not actually a statutory duty for them to do that, and unfortunately we can't make them do it, for want of a better word. But I don't know if anyone else has anything to say on that.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine.
I think we can cross-reference the motion with what we've done through this application, which is in accordance with how we agreed as a committee to deal with that at the time of the motion. Dan, did you want to go through that? I think primarily there's a standard paragraph which guides the officer to make sure that the questions that were asked of us in the motion are built into the report, and on page 55 we have indeed done that. Of course, there's only so much that we can get out of Southern Water with their corporation, but they're quite transparent about discharges, and we do tend to go to their websites to get a bit more information and on that as well. Is there anything else you can add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lee. I think it's a very worthwhile question addressing. Obviously, given Council's commitments, you quite rightly identify. What it will mean is I obviously have to look at those council commitments that we have made as a council. The first part being that the council resolves to recognise the policies to protect the catchments for our rare and precious habitats, including Itch and Meon, Test, Diva and Hamble, as far as possible, especially in line with local planning policy and the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework. So if you like, that's a panacea, an overarching catch-all. Suffice it to say, that just replicates our legal obligations in any event under the Conservation Species and Habitats Regulations 2017. So that, if you like, provides the backdrop and context. There's nothing new in that resolution from Council. We have that in the general law that we have to observe when we deal with a planning application. It's what we call a parallel regime. That is, when we look at a planning application, we look at that parallel regime being habitats regulations and so on. The second resolution from Council's motion was that we should be aware that there is evidence of deterioration of water quality from both private and statutory waste treatment systems due to cumulative impact of nitrates, phosphates, microplastics, pharmaceuticals, and multiple sewage discharge events. Now, at this point, I pause at that juncture. The key part that we have to deal with in terms of Natural England, who are statutory consultee, is, as we know, eutrophication. That is the increase of nutrients into discharge and into watercourses, which creates eutrophication or green algae later along down the watercourse. Natural England have produced a standard methodology as to how we deal with that, especially within the Push region, the Partnership of Urban South Hampshire. In terms of our obligations, our legal obligations, it's right that we conduct what is called a nutrient neutrality assessment and go through the necessary habitats regulations procedures. That is to conduct an appropriate assessment. So this council, acting as a statutory local planning authority, has to be sure, to the best scientific knowledge, that we are certain that this particular development achieves nutrient neutrality. Now, this is the only crucial part we have to deal with in terms of discharging our Regulation 63 obligations. There is nothing coming forwards in terms of microplastics or pharmaceuticals. Nevertheless, the council is correct to identify that. But suffice it to say, within this context, the officers, rest assured, have battled for nutrient neutrality. I think it's a fair assessment of where we are, and lots of conversations. You only need to look at the applicant across from the table from us. And there is a suite of complex planning conditions which deal with this. That's part 2 of the resolution. Part 3, draw on relevant evidence to make sure we assess the cumulative impacts of pollution, that this is factored into the local plan. Now, that's at policy level, plan making level. This is not before you today. We're dealing with what we call development management and actual application. One would hope in the local plan we have policies where this does come forward, and it would be right for members to obviously feed into that conversation. Fourthly, we asked the Health and Environment Committee to invite senior representatives from Southern Water, the EA and so on, to allow the council to better understand these problems. One would hope that members have had those conversations with our statutory undertakers and partners, especially 5, that we asked Southern Water from the motion date onwards in our planning consultation responses for major developments, of which this is a major development, to clarify which treatment works will be managing the sewage. Now, on the planning application documents, which is on the public portal, it is not just a report before you. You're here to consider the application, not the report. So one would hope that members of the public, and indeed members, you've tasked your mind to that duty. All of this is on the council website. As my colleague Catherine's already mentioned, the response from Southern Water was indeed, Councillor, you rightly say, less than helpful. We made that request under the Environmental Information Regulations. That's the equivalent, members of the public, of the FOI regime, Freedom of Information regime. We made that request to our statutory undertaker. Unfortunately, they exempted disclosure of that information. The law allows, in certain instances, when we ask for information, to exempt or accept the information. They relied upon an exemption, and they simply said, we don't hold that information. So in light of our council motion, I'm happy that the officers have used best endeavours to comply with your council motion, quite like rightly their members. Moving to resolution 6, that we request the planning assessment from now onwards include all reports, especially with major developments, appropriate coverage of the impact on watercourses. You've heard from my colleague Lorna, you'll find that on page 55, where there is a standard, if you like, template, where we can chop and change, add, tweak, and put those particulars in there. It's on page 55 in this particular report, and you'll find on that page how we've dealt with that particular part of your motion. Questions 7 and 8 go on to deal with ask leader and cabinet to collaborate with other local authorities. We have those in duties anyway. I hope, Councillor, that provides some context, but in terms of microplastics and pharmaceuticals, I'm afraid we simply are not there in terms of what Natural England and our statutory constitution requires of us when we discharge our duties. It's a rather large response to a very simple question, I'm afraid, but thank you for your time.
Thank you for your clarification. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Lee. I think it's a very important area that we're obviously, we're not, it's our consultees who are failing us, I'm afraid. It's but we have done all that we can as a council.
Can I have one more question, please?
Yes, you may.
I've heard
as long as it's not quite as long.
No. We've heard how the college wants to go the extra mile and so on, and the trees and the biodiversity protection, etc. Obviously, the biodiversity net gain regulations are imposed upon us. I guess we have to meet it from November onwards. Prior to that, it's nice to do.
That's the next section of questions. Sorry, Councillor Lee.
All right.
I know I normally take reports as a whole, but we've cut this one in half. So we're still just talking about impact, the principle of development and impact on the neighbourhood. Any more questions covering those areas? Councillor Reid.
I think I'm in the right area. Appropriate assessment on page 53. We refer to an increase of...
No, we haven't got to page 53 yet. We're up to page 46.
Okay.
Actually, any more up to page 46? Otherwise, we'll move on. Councillor Ashford.
Thank you, Chair. Like some of the other councillors, I was at the site visit the other day. Had a question, Kathy, about having the new accesses onto St Cross Road. And has it been considered that there should only be the one access inside and out rather than having two separate entrances? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think Emma, in her response, stated that the two accesses were considered to be less harmful in terms of traffic entering and leaving the site, because then they'd have to be a turning circle, which would impact on the level of landscaping and trees, would mean that they'd have to take more out to accommodate that. So the in-out accesses are considered to be more appropriate and protect more of the ecology and the trees on the site. Thank you, Chair.
So it's simply a case of trees versus wall, and the wall lost out on this case. Right. Okay, let's move on to the second section of the report then, from page 46 onwards, which does include all sorts of things, historic aspects, landscape, conditions, everything in the second half of the report. So, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Appropriate assessment on page 53, the second paragraph, refers to a net increase of 138 units on site. On the last paragraph on that page, it refers to 128. could you please clarify which number is correct, or am I reading it incorrectly?
Thank you, Chair. No, that was a typo. It is 128 units, not 138. So apologies for that, but it's definitely 128 units. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm looking at the relationship between the proposed boarding houses and the floodlights. The floodlights are specified, I believe, at being 15 metres up high. The site is more or less level. I'm not sure what the total height of the boarding houses would be, but do we have any sight lines or information about the extent to which the tops of those floodlights would be visible from St Cross, Edgar and roads to the southwest of the site?
Thank you, Chair. I don't have that specific information, but the sports pitch will actually sit lower than the boarding houses. So that would reduce the perception of the height of the floodlights, and also, as I've said, and you know, that they've been carefully considered. The floodlights been carefully considered to ensure that there's as least possible light spill. They're directional lights, so they should really only be lighting up the sports pitch and just the very immediate area around it with a lesser degree of illumination. So in terms of viewing those from the boarding house, you would be able to view them, but it's not anything that's going to be significantly harmful to the amenities of the residents of the boarding houses or other neighbouring properties. And as we've already heard, the immediate neighbouring properties are all owned by the college anyway. Not that that means that, you know, they might not be harmed by the lighting, but they're at such a distance that that's not going to be an issue. So you'll see them, but you won't be, and people wouldn't be sort of adversely affected in terms of their amenity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just a minute, Councillor Amy. Could I just ask about heritage assets, which was raised by one of our members of the public? This is in the conservation area, and it is within the setting of a historic listed building. So how have we assessed this? It is in the report, but if you could just explain quite quickly how we've assessed this to be within our planning, our rules, as it were, to be acceptable in those considerations. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Page 51 of the report. So as you know, the Historic Environment Officer provided a very detailed analysis of the proposals and considered each part of those proposals in terms of their impact and level of harm to the heritage assets, being Chernock House, which is Grade 2 listed, and the conservation area. Page 51, which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs down, the officer has stated that there is less than substantial harm as defined by the NPPF, which in itself can be a bit tricky to understand. But the level of harm is in the middle of that scale. So it's it also considers the extant planning consent that is at Antrim House for boarding houses, which falls within part of the site area of the current proposal. So comparing the two proposals, he considered that there is some additional harm to the conservation area, but it's only a small margin. And so that, in accordance with our policies and the NPPF, is considered to be acceptable in terms of the heritage impact. With regards to Chernock House, there is a change to the setting of Chernock House because there's a degree of openness from that building across Kingsgate Park. And there again, there's a degree of harm, but this also is at the middle level of less than substantial harm. And so the overall conclusion is that yes, there is harm, but it's at the middle of less than substantial, and therefore, in accordance with our policies and the NPPF, that level of harm is acceptable.
May I just add to that, Chair, that we have a duty to assess the harm, in which Kat has set out what's special about the buildings and what's special about what the details of the harm are. We have a duty to weigh that against the public benefit of the scheme. We have heard quite a lot today of what that is, which I think in summary is it sort of no longer being an overnight single-sex school, the college facilities and the improved accessibility to them for the general public, and then obviously ensuring that that public benefit is delivered through the condition which allows that access, which Councillor Williams had asked the question about. So that is our duty discharged in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Lee.
Can I go back to my mistimed question, please? I'm looking at page 53, ecology and biodiversity. And as I said, I believe that we can't insist on a biodiversity net gain statement as per the new legislation that will be in place from November. But I'm just wondering whether is this something that we can request from the developers? My second question is, I noted that there was a representation from one of the residents about red listed species. I think it's swift house sparrows and starlings in severe decline. And of course, as you may know, there's these swift bricks, which potentially could be conditioned into build standards. And I'm just wondering what the consideration is for that as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the biodiversity net gain requirement will come in later this year, which requires 10% net gain. At the moment, we can't enforce developers to do 10%, although we would see them have some net gain. But with regards to this specific site, there will be a 12.32% biodiversity net gain in different habitats that will be created. And in terms of hedgerows and trees that will be added as part of the development, that results in a 17% biodiversity net gain. On page 62, condition 12, a detailed ecological appraisal with mitigation and enhancement measures has already been submitted and accepted by our ecologists. So that will pin down the measures that will be taken to ensure that there is net gain in biodiversity and that protected species, animals, plants, etc., will be protected throughout the development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kat. Yes, I think there's a very extensive report actually on the website on ecology and biodiversity, and that will show you that swift boxes and such like are going to be included in the development. They're part of that plan, and also that the net biodiversity net gain is actually well above the 10% that's coming in November.
Great. I'm sorry, you didn't respond to my question about swift bricks, which I guess is
I think they're covered in the report.
Is that actually in the report? Is it? Forgive me if I missed it.
Thank you, Chair. Off the top of my head, I can't quite remember if swift bricks specifically were mentioned, but there certainly will be mitigation for birds in the form of nesting facilities and also by the provision of habitat, hedgerows, etc., that are helpful for birds and other animals to nest in. Thank you, Chair.
I think I did look up on the report because I'm also very keen on swift bricks such like, and I'm sure I saw them there. They are a very easy thing to put in at the building stage. Right. Are we getting to the end of questions, Councillor Laming?
Thank you.
I'm pleased to see on the sustainability side that we're talking about BREEAM excellence, which brings it up to the standard and slightly above what we've got on the new leisure sector. I'm curious though that we're talking about CP11, where we're conditioning that in under condition 17. Now, we were told at the last planning meeting that we couldn't condition CP11 on housing, so I'd like clarification on why we can do it on this occasion.
Thank you, Chair. CP11 requires BREEAM outstanding, and it's the outstanding part of that policy that the government some years ago said that we can't require developers to achieve the outstanding level of BREEAM. The scheme will achieve BREEAM excellent, which is still a very high standard of sustainability, and therefore, you know, that, as you say, that is conditioned to ensure that that is achieved, so that's considered to be in compliance with policy CP11. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, but really the question, Kathy, is that enforceable? Because we were told that we couldn't enforce CP11 on housing. Is it different for commercial?
Thank you, Chair. It's not CP11 in itself that's enforceable. It's a specific BREEAM requirement of excellent, and then there's sustainability documents on the file. Plus, we've got the conditions to ensure that it's implemented, so we can see the design of the buildings so that they comply with the excellent standard. And then also there's a sort of a post-construction test. Did it actually, you know, did the design work? So it's those requirements that are enforceable rather than CP11 in itself.
Any more questions, members? So we move to debate. Perhaps I could kick things off. We did all members of the planning committee who were available. I think there were just 2 members who weren't able to join us, but who know the site anyway, came on a site visit on Monday of this week. And thank you to the college for allowing us to have a tramp round various building sites and so on. Extraordinary, extensive archaeological dig going on, and we look forward to seeing the results of that in due course. But I think that I would like to commend our officers and the college on the work that they've put into this application. I think it's completely thorough. I understand and accept the concerns of local residents. I hope that we have reassured you on various points that there won't be overlooking. There will be extra news screening, and the accesses onto St Cross Road will be lightly used, really for the servicing of the boarding houses rather than for access by parents and students. Or teachers for that matter. So I am happy that we have covered all the areas of concern in this report and in the questions that we've raised this morning, and that this will be actually an enhancement not just to the college, but indeed to the city and the services that we provide to our wider community. Other members, debate. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just commend the officer for the report itself? Very interesting. I found it extremely informative. The one or 2 bits, but in general, it was very good. The one thing that concerns me is, like any area of development, there are neighbours who are very concerned over parking and traffic noise from commercial vehicles. We will not be able to give them an answer once again as to what that condition 23 will be, which is sad because over in some years ago we used to ensure that it was a detailed piece of report that can satisfy the neighbours' concerns. So people will leave here today still not knowing the answers. I'm just a bit concerned about it. That and one or two other things that seem to have disappeared from our normal discussions, such as landscaping in general. We don't hear that on many occasions, but on this case, it's a case of the on-street parking from contractors, and we all know this is going to be a big build. There's going to be a lot of contractors, so just a concern. But all in all, Chair, the only question I did have was being answered by the highways. The fact that all of the elements go south, not north. So I can now understand that element. So I would have no problems in going along with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Anyone? Councillor Edwards?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin just by endorsing Councillor Reid's point. I was going to make a similar one myself, which I thank you don't need to do. It would be very desirable if at the end of this project there had been fewer complaints from surrounding residents than there have been during the construction of the sports hall. And I'm sure that the college will do all it can to go in that direction. I think this is a legitimate use of the land by the college for education. I see some benefits to the wider community. We've had quite a lot of discussion about the light and details around the parkland and the sports facilities. We haven't talked much about the building itself. And I'd just like to say that as well as being a highly energy efficient building and therefore being particularly acceptable and appropriate, I also think it's a very well designed building, and I think it will in time come to contribute to the character of the conservation area rather than contradict it. That's a personal opinion, of course, but I do recognise the quality of the design, and I'd like that to be recorded. So I should be supporting the application.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Any more contributions to debate? Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst the boarding houses and the all-weather pitch will have some impact on the setting of the conservation area overall, I believe it's less than severe. I am impressed with how the building design and the texture of the brickwork is in sympathy with the surrounding heritage assets. I'm also of the opinion that the all-weather pitch and the boarding houses impacts only marginally on the neighbouring residential amenity and is mitigated by the time restrictions on the use of acceptable hours both in and outside term time by condition 7. In common with other councillors' comments up to this point in time, I will also be supporting this decision. Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, just to echo previous comments, well done to the staff. I thought the report was very thorough. And well done to the college. I think sustainability direction is commendable. I did have one little observation. This is very personal. The pitch of the roof might have been slightly different to get solar PV on it, but I guess we can't have everything. I think the nature considerations are, again, positive. So I will be supporting the motion.
Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yes, it's a curious experience to be discussing heritage issues about an institution that goes back to the 14th century. And clearly it hasn't survived so long by being frozen like a Siberian mammoth, but by adapting and changing over the years. And if you go around the site, there's architecture, well, samples of architecture from since the 14th century, and some very interesting buildings. And I don't doubt in time that these new boarding houses will also be seen in the same light. And you know, when you go back to the last boarding house built in 1911 or something, well, I mean, it was the same feeling then that they were destroying a heritage asset. I don't think they even discussed heritage assets at that time. Anyway, I think it's wonderful to see this institution thriving and carrying on and adapting to new circumstances, and I shall certainly approve it.
Lovely. Well, I think that's the end of debate, members. So this application is recommended for approval. Can I see all those in favour of that, please?
That's 9 unanimous, Chair.
All members, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So we will now take a 15-minute break and return at 11 o'clock. Thank you. meeting of the Planning Committee, and we move to item number 7 on our agendas. This is Crowhurst Kennels at Suttonwood Lane, Brighton, and the officer presenting is again Catherine Watson. If you'd like to give us your presentation, Kat, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just waiting for the presentation to come up. Did it go a bit? It's oh right, sorry, I thought it went a bit larger, but no, that's apologies for that. Thank you, Chair. The application is for a new dwelling at Crowhurst Kennels, Suttonwood Lane, Brighton. Here we can see the site and the location of the former dog boarding kennels. Here we have the existing and proposed plan. So on the left is the existing plan. So you can see that the house Woodlands is situated to the south, and then the boarding kennels situated to the north. 3 boarding kennels that we can see. Here we can see the proposed site plan. So again, Woodlands, which is the existing dwelling, and we can see the roof of the new residential dwelling with a new access onto Suttonwood Lane. Here we have the floor plan. So there's a number of bedrooms and open plan living, dining, kitchen area and sitting room. And the roof plan, as you can see. And then elevations looking north, so you can see the side of the elevation just here, and we can see the direction of the view at the top here, and then just below it is the garage, north elevation of proposed detached garage. And in the south elevation, again, we can see where the red line marks out the south elevation there. Then we've got the west elevation. So here's the house, sort of single story, flat roof, lots of glazing. And then we've got underneath, we've got the garage, west elevation. And then the east elevations. So we've got the main house and then the garage beneath. And there's a section through the site. So on the right hand side is the existing dwelling. Then if we move towards the left and down the slope, we've got another building there, and then we've got the new dwelling at the bottom of the slope. And then we've got a proposed landscaping plan. So the red lines of the former kennels to be demolished. It's going to include green roofs, permeable surfacing, and then around the site is to be planted up as meadow, with a pond at the top right there. And then you can see the trees around the boundary. These form part of designated ancient woodland. And then we've got some details. So you can see section through on the left hand side, and some of the facade details show the materials, timber cladding, and the doors and windows. And then here we have some photos. So these are taken from Woodlands House, or near Woodlands House, and we can see the extent of the former kennels buildings. And again, this is taken from a bit more towards the centre of the site, and we can see them in the distance, as well as the woodland which surrounds the site. Here's a view from Woodlands House, the rear of Woodlands House, and again we can see the woodland in the background, and again from Woodlands House, a bit more of a view of the garden and the woodland. And then looking towards, from Woodlands House towards the lower boundary and side boundary that is adjacent to Suttonwood Lane. Again, we've got the former kennels, and then adjacent to the woodland on the western side of the site, and just see that there. And then these are the kennel buildings. So the kennels have not been functional for several years now, and it's not economically viable for that to come back into a use. Again, we've got the kennel buildings. And then here's a view of the Woodlands House, which is a fairly new build. And then got Sutton Hill Road Lane, sorry, on the right hand side there. And then here's a view of the entrance to the former kennels on Suttonwood Lane again. And then here's the site approaching from the north. So just where the sun has caught the boundary there is where the access to the site is. That ends my presentation. My recommendation is to refuse, and the reasons for refusal are given at the end of my report. Happy to answer questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Catherine. We now move to public speaking. We have two supporters, Peter Young and Richard Bacon. If you'd like to come forward. Is this Mrs. Bacon?
It is.
Okay, and are you going to be speaking as well? If there are any questions, fine, thank you. All right. You have 3 minutes between you. Do you know how you'll be sharing the time? You're generally speaking. Okay. When you're ready, thank you.
Good morning, councillors. We're here today because our proposal has been well supported by our neighbours and the parish council, and I'd like to say thank you to our supporters that have turned up today. To provide context, my wife and I ran Crowhurst Kennels as a family business which prospered until the animal welfare regulations changed and our facilities became inadequate. The council gave us 6 months to make substantial improvements, which, because they were prohibitively expensive, forced our closure. We now are left with a blighted brownfield site comprising of 3 large kennel blocks with surrounding hard standing. With the business stymied, we must find a viable way to regenerate the land. The least impactful solution is the delivery of a single-storey passive house focusing on sustainability issues. We will deliver a large reduction in the build form and hard standing. The house will be net zero and will require virtually no heating. With a green roof and local cladding materials, we want this to be an exemplar for sustainable construction. We believe that the site will benefit from our proposals. There will be less buildings, a reduction in vehicle movements in the lane, removal of nearly all the hard permeable surfaces, and a biodiversity net gain of 156% for habitats and 243 for hedgerows. Whilst we understand that planning policy should be followed, we believe that other material considerations apply here. The scheme does not develop the countryside, it removes unsightly sprawling kennels. Given the unique circumstances, we submit that the councillors could take a pragmatic decision here. This would not set a precedent. There are objections to the proximity of the woodland, but there can only be objections if there is harm to the woodland. The council has not demonstrated that there will be harm, which is defined as loss and deterioration of the woodland. Neither of these apply here. Evidence from our arborist has been sent to the councillor, to the case officer, but I don't believe they've been included in your papers. Furthermore, currently there is a near zero gap between the woodland and the adjacent kennels. Our scheme places the new building nearly 15 metres from the woodland, and the demolition of the kennels will free up 300 square metres of ground to be available for suitable planting next to the woodland. Regarding nutrient neutrality, removing the kennels is another positive win. Our nutrient neutrality statement confirms that removing dogs has a positive impact on site nutrients. We showed nitrates and phosphates from dog waste far exceed the nutrient output of the passive house. However, this matter has not been fully considered, which we think is unreasonable.
I'm afraid that's the end of your time. So if you could stop there, thank you. But please wait for questions of clarification from the members. Members? No, no questions. All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for coming along. You may return to your seats. Thank you. Kat, did you want to update us on anything following that contribution?
Thank you, Chair. I can just clarify some of the issues that were raised. So firstly, the ancient woodland and the proximity. Our tree officer and also our ecologist have objected because national guidance, Natural England guidance states there should be a 15-metre buffer between residential development and the woodland. In this case, the applicant has stated that it's not possible to achieve this, and they've proposed a 7.5-metre planted buffer along the edge of the woodland. However, the impact on the woodland doesn't just include the built form, it includes the potential garden with non-native species or other drainage issues or other things that come with a residential type of development and the garden associated with that. And so I'm sure you will have read in the report, page 104, 103 and 104, that there are very strong reasons why the ecologist and the tree officer are objecting, and they're in line both with our own policies and the NPPF. But that's all I have to say about that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kat. Okay, members, we'll take questions on the whole report. Do we have any questions for our officer? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a little puzzled. On page 103, sustainable transport, this particular application requires new access. But the second paragraph, but this is not a planning matter. I'm puzzled because we've had many applications where a new access is required and we comment on it. So what is the circumstance that we don't comment on this one?
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify on that, the new access does require planning consent, but also consent needs to be granted by the Highways Authority for new access onto the road. So perhaps there was a bit of it wasn't worded quite so clearly, but just to confirm, the access does need planning consent, but it also needs consent from Hampshire Highways as well. Thank you.
That bit I now understand, because that's the way I always thought it did.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions, members? Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. I realise this is a comment, I get referred to a comment made by Parish Council, but I would seek your views on it. They say that this would represent a benefit by increasing the stock of smaller buildings within the parish, smaller dwellings, rather. Looking at the drawings here, a rough estimate that I've made is that this is perhaps 250 square meters in floor plan. I wondered if you had any views on the scale of the proposed house and whether it could, in any context, be considered a small dwelling.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the floor space in my head at the moment, but policy DM3 covers small dwellings in the countryside and classifies a small dwelling as anything with a gross external floor area of 120 square meters or less. So regards to the principle that new residential development is contrary to policy MTRA 4 in the countryside, so the proposal is not acceptable in principle. Additionally, the proposed dwelling would have a floor space greater than 120 square meters, and therefore it would be contrary to policy DM3 as well. Yeah.
Any more questions, members? Shall we move to debate? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I can understand the reasoning for the application. However, it does run against the local plan. The time to put it in is now, because Winchester is formulating a new local plan which will come into being in 2025, unless the date changes again. And that is the time when all this has to be taken care of. There have been a lot of changes with regard to planning law since the existing local plan was brought into being. And obviously passive housing is one of those elements. I must admit, I like the plan. It's very nice, but unfortunately it goes against our planning policy. If we go against our planning policy, there is every chance that it will open a floodgate, even at this late hour.
Thank you. Perhaps I could add that I think the design is laudable. I think the passive house aspiration is great, but I agree with Councillor Reid. I'm afraid that under our current plan, this breaks far too many rules, I'm afraid, and without some overarching and unique reason to give it planning permission, and the demolition of some existing redundant, rather ugly buildings, I'm afraid, is not sufficient reason to overturn our clear policies. We certainly wouldn't be allowed to. We're not able to do that at this stage. But I think that hopefully within the new local plan there may be a little more flexibility. We'll have to see. Okay, members, shall we move to the vote if there's no more contribution to debate? So this application is recommended for refusal. Can I see all those in favour of refusing this application? That's all 8.
9 unanimous, yeah.
Oh, actually, it's Councillor Laming's had to leave, so we have 8 members, and that is all 8 members. Thank you very much, members. So we'll have a slight break whilst we change our presenting officer before we turn to item number 8 on our agendas. Thank you. Okay, members, I think we're ready to move on to the next item on our agendas, which is item number 8, Stoke Common Farm, Bishopstoke Lane, Brambridge, reference 22/01357/FUL. And the officer presenting is Jordan Wiseman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the application proposes a change of use of an existing agricultural barn to a mixed use between light industrial class EG3 and storage and distribution class B8. And you can see on the first slide here the unit itself outlined in red, which then tails back to the access on the road there. The next slide is the proposed site plan, which also depicts the existing situation on the site as well. The unit subject to this application is shaded in grey here. This next slide is the proposed floor plan for the unit. These are the proposed elevations for the unit, which also show no change from the existing. Moving on to site photographs. Photo on the left shows the unit on the right hand side looking south, and the photo on the right hand side is stood in front of that unit looking north away from the site and towards some other buildings on the site. The photo in the top of the screen is looking northeast away from the unit subject to this application, and again towards the bottom is looking north towards some other buildings on the site. This slide is looking southwest, which shows the unit subject of this application, and a similar photo in the below in the same direction. That concludes the presentation for this item, and the recommendation is to permit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jordan. We now move to public speaking. We have Councillor Susan Cook, who is the ward councillor. Hi, Sue. You know the routine. You have 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes, and the timer will start when you start speaking. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, fellow councillors, officers and members of the general public. Thank you for allowing me to speak concerning this application in Brambridge Colden Common, known as Bishopstoke, or should I say Stoke Common Farm. May I begin my time? And actually what I firstly wish to say is I am in agreement with the officer to recommend, but let me start. Sadly, for the last 3 years plus, they've had to put up with the residents nearby at the mobile home park. Numerous vehicles coming and going. There was a paint shop there. The Winchester City Council Environmental Health Department was recommending this application back in September of last year, was to refuse it due to the lack of an acoustics report, which was asked for on numerous occasions. The extractor was then removed as it was causing many problems by the proposed activity of the paint car repairers and paintworks. This report was not done, and in addition, no justification was provided for why it wasn't going to be carried out, hence why the officer in the environmental health was recommending refusal. Until the above was addressed back in March of this year, environmental health was consulted again. We know that the extractor had been removed, but as we know, the applicant's actions resulted in complaints by residents and the nearby mobile home park. Some residents have actually lived in that park for over 40 years, for when it was a dairy farm. This application previously had a diverse and adverse impact on the neighbours. Its health, it refers to the fabric of the building in its correct state, but outside storage, and the word storage is in this application, which concerns people. The fabric of the building is extremely important and it must contain noise. The hours that the company that leased this building, what has been asked and what I understand from the report is not to open on a Sunday, which is great news, Monday to Friday 8 till 6, and on a Saturday, I believe 8 till 4. Now, we prefer, if it's at all possible at this meeting, to make some other suggestions, and that would be definitely not to trade on a Sunday. Saturday, make it 9 till 1300 hours, and more favourable Monday to Friday would be 9 in the morning till 1700 hours. There's no end of reports in the last 3 years from various residents who sadly couldn't be here today. What we must all remember here, this is land in the countryside, and it was used for agricultural purposes. This point was raised by the parish council, who sadly can't be here today either. The health and well-being for the nearby residents has deteriorated, and many of them due to the past and ongoing activity of the farm. Residents have constantly complained, and it's had a real hardship on them. So we are asking here today that this committee puts conditions on this application, not just the class, but the use. And as for the times of operation, business rather than what's been proposed. Conversations, I understand, have taken place with the agent and enforcement, and they're not exactly prompt in getting information back. Enforcement will take action if, obviously, they contravene the conversation and in months. The whole purpose of enforcement is when one acts or processes an enforcement, something that requires to be enforced. So to sum things up, I'm in the agreement, as I've already said in my opening time here today, with the planning officer to permit. But I ask you, the planning committee, please make sure those conditions are placed on this application. And should the leasee or whoever that takes on board this building, they don't adhere to those time schedules, that enforcement act appropriately and promptly. And I thank you for allowing me to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cook, and thank you for sticking within your time allotted. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for the local councillor? No? Councillor Reid.
Councillor Cook, would the recommendations that you're proposing be in line with whatever exists on the site at the moment?
I would not be able to actually answer that question. If I may, Madam Chair, I'd like to put that question, if I may, to Jordan Wiseman, because our understanding as a ward councillor and the understanding of the nearby residents, who aren't just Winchester residents, there are actually residents further up the road that are in Eastleigh Borough Council who have had adverse impact from this particular way that the property has been used. Only this weekend, in fact, another report came in, hence why you've had an update that there was activity going on at the particular unit. So I would like to ask that question to Jordan to confirm those times currently, if I may, because at the moment they're operating all over the time. Thank you.
I think we'll come back to the officer in due course. Thank you, Councillor Reid. Thank you, Councillor Cook. No other questions? You may return to your seat. Thank you. Okay, bearing that in mind, Jordan, if you could respond to that, and if you could just explain to members quite clearly what the proposed business class covers, what sort of activities and what it doesn't cover, so that local residents have a better idea of what might be happening there. Thank you. Oh, I beg your pardon. We've got another public speaker, Norma Morris. Thank you, Norma. Sorry about that. Rushing ahead of myself. So the microphone switched perfect, and the timer will start when you start speaking. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to address this committee. With my husband, I am the owner of that site. We ourselves still farm the site, as well as that building, the building in question was being rented out. Can I just say it has not been rented out recently, and I'll carry on where I intended to start, if I may. So, having read the officer's report and heard the presentation, I do not feel there's much I need to add. I consider the report by the officer to be fair and accurate. I would emphasise that my husband and I never wanted to upset our neighbours, but I should like to point out the objections from the residents have been misleading, exaggerated, inaccurate and at times offensive. And some of those words would go with what the councillor has just said. Some of her report has been exaggerated reports from those residents. The site contains a range of farm buildings still in use as farm buildings and as part of the working farm. The farm buildings sit alongside the Park Home development, which was established long after the farm was first operational. Unfortunately, the proximity of the two uses causes an obvious conflict, but we have done our best to mitigate against this. Our neighbours objected to the farm use, particularly the housing of livestock in the buildings, which is obviously the lawful use and should be expected. We are therefore seeking an alternative commercial use, which is supported by planning policy at all levels. Whilst the neighbours might wish for no use, this clearly is not tenable. The proposed use as light industrial is a quiet, low intensity use, which in my view will have no more impact than the current agricultural use. Granting a planning permission also allows controls to be imposed, which are currently absent. The proposals therefore provide a clear benefit to our neighbours, as they will have a low intensity controlled use. We fully accept the suggested working hours of 7 to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, 7 to 4 p.m. Saturday, and no working on Sundays. I would like to say at this point that the proposal by the councillor of a 9 a.m. start would not be acceptable for a working farm. So there would already be, we would already be on the farm legitimately with fairly noisy activity from our normal time of starting at 7:30. So I mean, whether the building is restricted further, that's obviously for you to decide. But yeah. So I trust you will approve the planning application and that calm can be restored to the site.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. Just wait a minute. Members may have items of clarification to ask you. But they don't. Okay, thank you very much. If you could just switch off the microphone and return to your seat. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right. So Jordan, if you could just update us on exactly what is covered by that new condition and that class of use. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the uses, first of all, they've applied for a mixed use. The first one being Class EG3, which is defined as an industrial use which could be carried out within a residential area. So that would be a light intensity industrial use. Many different businesses could fit into that category. But that's the sort of the letter of the definition of that use. The other use would be for B8, which would be storage and distribution, which would allow the tenants of the building to store items or materials inside the building and then distribute them from the building outside, away from the site. So that's does that help answer your question, Chair?
I think so, thank you. Are there any restrictions on the number of vehicles allowed to use the site, or is that something we can't condition at this stage because of previous uses?
It's not recommended as a condition at this point. I think to restrict the total number of vehicles using the site as a whole would be difficult as part of this application due to the wider use of the site as a farm. I would just add that any conditions with regards to opening hours and that sort of thing as part of this application would only apply to this independent building on its own and not the wider use, and those conditions would apply to anything inside that red line, so it wouldn't impact the wider farm use of that of the site.
Thank you, that's clear. So members, do we have questions for Jordan, please? Councillor Reid.
Chairman, the one thing that I think is going to be difficult, but I'm not sure whether it can be done, on this type of application, we normally look at the size of vehicles that are using the site. But as this is a shared site, I would imagine that is more problematical. Obviously, a storage and distribution I would guess people would come in large vehicles and take away in small vehicles. But that's just an assumption. But going back to the original question, is this more difficult to control because it is going to be a shared site?
I think that was the gist of what Jordan was saying earlier about times of use as well. But is that the case, Jordan?
I think that would be a difficult thing to control. The size vehicles, large vehicles already use the site as its current uses as a farm. So I think that would be a difficult one to condition and hasn't been recommended at this point.
Other questions, members? Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Just a quick one. Class E, would that generally include paint spraying?
Thank you, Councillor. So no, it wouldn't. The vehicle paint spraying would fall under a heavier industrial use and would not be covered by the specific part of Class E that is being proposed for.
Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. Did I hear correctly that the applicant was saying that they could start Monday to Friday at 7:30 instead of 7 o'clock?
No, I think the applicant said that the usual farm activities start from around 7:30. That was what she was saying.
So she's not offering to amend the condition
No.
3.
And I don't think it would be reasonable to do that myself.
Well, if she was offering it, it would have been, wouldn't it? Thank you very much.
Councillor Lee.
I wonder if I could just seek clarification. With respect to the industrial light use, is there a way to condition the way the building is designed and constructed for noise abatement? And I'm just wondering whether that's perhaps part of the solution. It's not necessarily just traffic, but it's the activities within the building and how that noise emanates and leaves the curtilage of the property.
By its very nature, the use class that we're giving permission, if you accept that, is supposed to be a use that doesn't have these sort of associated noise impacts, which would be harmful to the sort of private enjoyment and amenity of neighbouring properties. So the controlling the use is then expected to control those sorts of impacts. That's why we don't have further noise acoustic reports because of the use that's been negotiated. I think that's
clear. Thank you very much, Lorna. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Any other questions? No? Debate. Councillor Reid.
Chair, having read the report and obviously the questions been asked and answered, I can see no planning reason to refuse the application.
I too have clearly read the report. There are quite a lot of conditions. I think that the times of operation are reasonable. I think because it's a farm situation anyway, that, you know, we all know that farmers start at ridiculous hours in the morning. So trying to restrict the use of this building later than that, I don't think is reasonable. And I think it quite clearly says at no time on Sundays or recognised public holidays will there be any activity, and it stops at 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. So I think and 6 o'clock during the week. So really I think that's quite reasonable in terms of amenity for local residents. It's always going to be a busy site, I suspect, with the farm activities as well. But it has been since before the caravan park arrived, so it's not unusual in these circumstances. So I will be happy to support the officer's recommendation. So shall we move to that recommendation now, members? So this application is recommended for approval. Can I see those in favour, please? I believe that's all eight. Yes, thank you. That's great. Thank you. All 8 members in approval. So that application is approved. Thank you. We'll just have a short break whilst we change.
Is it possible to have a read
is Liz Young. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to the change of use of part of the ground floor area of an existing dwelling from residential to children's nursery use. The application also includes proposals to carry out extensions and also to provide additional parking to the front of the site. Just moving to the first slide, here we have the site location plan. The application site is marked by the red line, which you can see towards the top right of the page. So the application site consists of the residential curtilage of the existing dwelling, which is Trollingham Farm. So this next slide shows the aerial photograph. So this is looking towards the application site, which is marked by the yellow star at the centre of the page. It lies approximately half a kilometre west of the built-up area of Bishop's Waltham. So it lies in open countryside. You can just see the settlement of Durley, which lies towards the left-hand page. It's accessed off Winters Hill, which is a C classified highway. Backs onto an equestrian site to the south, and the east boundaries are joined by a detached property, which is Meadowview. So just moving on to the existing and proposed site layout plan, you can see the proposed layout to the right hand side. The two existing vehicle access points would not change. The main change to the layout involves the introduction of 15 parking spaces to the front of the site. A bin store and electric vehicle charging points are also proposed. This plan also shows the location of the proposed outdoor play area, which is going to go immediately to the rear. So that's just here where the proposed rear extension is also proposed to the rear of the house, alongside the boundary with the neighbouring property, that's Meadowview. This next slide shows the existing and proposed ground floor plan. Proposed ground floors on the right. So the blue shading that you can see indicates the area that's proposed to be used for the children's nursery. So this would amount to approximately 140 square metres. It would also include part of the proposed single-storey rear extension, which is just shown here. The yellow shading indicates the proposed outdoor play area, which would amount to just under 65, approximately 65 square metres. So that would consist of an artificial grass surface enclosed by a 1.2 metre high closed boarded fence. The unshaded area that you can see is the area that would be retained as residential. Just in terms of the use itself, opening hours would run between 7 AM and 6 PM Monday to Friday. Moving to the next slide, here we have the proposed roof plan, but also the existing first floor, which would remain unchanged, and also the proposed roof plan. Again, the play area is identified in the yellow shading. But the proposed roof extension is marked by the grey shading, which you can just see here to the left hand side of the roof. Mainly consists of the slight extension to the ridge line. So you can see the extent of the roof enlargement more clearly here on the existing and proposed front and rear elevations. These just in terms of background, these alterations remain the same as those which were approved previously in the application in 2022. It also involves as well as the slight lengthening to the ridge, there's also a proposal to change it to a crop gable from a hip. So just moving on to the side elevations, you can see here the extent of the proposed single-storey extension. Again, this remains similar to what was approved previously on the application back in 2022, but with a slightly reduced footprint in the case of this application. Just moving on to the site photographs, this is taken from the existing vehicle access towards the front elevation of the house. So the proposed parking area is going in this area to the front property. So that's 15 parking spaces overall. So 10 would be drop-off spaces for parents. 5 would be for members of staff. This view is taken looking towards the side elevation of the house. So there's the garage there in the foreground. The proposed rear extension would be going just here off the rear of the property, and the children's play area would be alongside that. This view is taken looking towards the rear elevation of the site. The buildings you can see in the distance are the relate to the equestrian business, which joins the rear boundary. This final photograph shows the view looking towards the rear elevation of the property. You can just make out the view towards the roof of the neighbouring property in the distance. That's Meadow View. So the children's play area would be going in this location just here, and this existing flat roof extension would be enlarged. That brings us to the end of the slides. The recommendation is that planning permission should be refused, alongside the 2 reasons stated in the report relating to noise impacts and the character of the area. We've also received an objection from the tree officer, so it's proposed that that should be added as a 3rd reason for refusal. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. We now move to public contributions. So Jeanette Parker, you are an objector. If you could come forward, thank you. The microphone is switched on with the button at the bottom of it, and the timer will start when you start speaking. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jeanette Parker. I live at Meadowview Farm, which is directly next door to Trollingham Farm. My husband and I have lived here for 14 years. The image currently displayed shows our property, Meadowview Farm, at the top and Trollingham Farm at the side. The proposed development is highlighted. It also incorporates the conversion of 2/3 of the existing main house. You can see the close proximity of the 2 properties. We were surprised to get the letter through the post from Winchester Council stating our neighbour's proposal. Please display picture 2. The proposed outdoor play area is highlighted in yellow. This is 1 metre from our boundary fence, adjacent to our patio and lawn areas we use most days. The potential disturbance from what is at present a very tranquil rural environment to the potential disturbance of 18 or more under 5s playing within 1 metre away on a daily basis is unthinkable. The application was supported by only 2 people who live in Durley. This suggests that the proposal would not primarily serve a need which originates from the immediate locality of Durley. Most people would access the already 35 day nurseries for children within 5 miles of Durley. Day nurseries for children are located in purpose-built buildings like community centres, ancillary church buildings, and often within school campuses. These locations are easily accessible in the centre of communities. They are not created from a residential home with neighbours within 1 metre away in the middle of the countryside. Picture 3, please. The image taken last week shows the front of the two properties. As you can see, Trollingham Farm's driveway on the right normally has 1 or 2 owners' cars parked most days. This would increase to 18 to 20 vehicles. All visitors to the site would have to arrive by car, as there is no pedestrian pathway or bus along Winters Hill. The general increased vehicular movement will harm the character of the rural area. Durley Parish Council have raised concerns about the additional traffic and the potential impact this will have on Durley, and Environmental Health also raised concerns and recommended the application is refused. In summary, a day nursery for children generates considerably more activity than a family home. I do not think there was any consideration by the applicants as to the impact this proposal would have on neighbours who live very close to them, either when they thought of the idea or when the plans were designed. We all have a right to continue to experience daily peaceful enjoyment of the place we call home. I recommend that this application is refused. Thank you for listening and giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Parker. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for Mrs. Parker? No? Thank you very much. If you could switch off the mic and return to your seat. Thank you. And now we have Jo Churcher, I think, the applicant's mum. Welcome. Like to take your seat, and the microphone is switched on with the button at the bottom, and the time will start when you start speaking, and you have 3 minutes too. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm substitute for my son and daughter at the last minute.
If you could just speak up slightly so we can.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Basically, this plan is for a rural, outstanding early years nursery that's accessible and inclusive and caters for all children with differing needs and disabilities. There are other nurseries in the area, but they don't cater for the local demands as they're oversubscribed. The housing around this area has expanded considerably in the last few years, and an infrastructure to enable parents to work needs to expand to meet these needs. We strategically planned for staggered drop-off and pick-up times to minimise traffic congestion, and many parents choosing our nursery would already be driving through Durley en route to their destinations. There's a bus stop a few hundred yards away from the nursery, and this is serviced in line with the proposed nursery operating days. While we would encourage our children to express themselves freely, we are proactively incorporating noise-reduced materials in our outdoor space. Our cosy nursery is designed for a maximum of 18 children, with the initial estimate of just 10 in our first years, with minimal staff size who will be trained to respect the neighbours as regard to noise. In the vicinity of Trollingham Farm, there are several other businesses operating on both sides of the property, 2 at Meadowview Farm, and on the other side, a busy equestrian centre where traffic is going in and out all day and the evening. It would be inequitable to single out Trollingham Farm as a concern when it's in line with the operations of nearby establishments. In the plans, there's been a zone of empty space left between the boundary of Meadowview for segregation purposes. The majority of the nursery boundary will be a building and outdoor area consisting of a brick wall with a roof, which will minimise noise and travelling around. The learning environment activities are focused indoors or under the covered area. This will also limit outside noise. The environment is free flow, so there will not be large numbers of children in the outdoor area at any one time. This isn't a school where it's regular playtimes, it's just a couple of toddlers going in and out to occupy themselves. I'd just like to add that my daughter-in-law is passionate about this project, having worked for over 20 years in a childcare-oriented environment and having been trained initially to Montessori standards. She currently works within a charity giving guidance and advice to families with children with special needs and disabilities, working closely with medical professionals and social services. She's very keen to offer an inclusive childcare environment in a pleasant rural area that supports all children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for Mrs. Churcher? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just clarify the age group that the nursery will be catering for? Because that makes a great deal of difference.
It's under school age, it'd be 2 to 4.
And the staffing numbers would therefore be in line with national criteria?
Yes, it will.
Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. You may return to your seat. Thank you. Liz, do you want to make any updates following those contributions?
No, no updates as it stands, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the whole report for questions, members. Councillor Williams.
I had a question specifically on Hampshire highways. On our website, they state that the road is the 30-mile-an-hour limit. I know there was some email going back and forth. It is actually a 40-mile-an-hour limit, that stretch. So I was wondering if highways sort of fully assessed the impacts of the junction itself sort of pulling out. I was wondering if that could be clarified.
In terms of well, exactly what issues they've looked at, we did go back to them to clarify some issues on the back of their original comment, which related to basically parking and turning within the site and trip rate and the hours that the use would operate for. So I went back on those points, and their follow-up comment basically didn't relate so much to speed limits. It was more to do with whether the use from a highways point of view could be controlled with conditions. So overall, they haven't raised any objections. Speed wasn't a major issue from what their comment was originally. So,
and the only reason I mentioned the speed is that there'll be different visibility displays with the increased speed. So whether that was something that they had considered under a 30 limit, or whether the 40 would be considered as needing a larger visibility display.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, in terms of that point, I don't know exactly, whether they would have visited the site. So I mean, the comment made didn't raise visibility as a specific concern. I mean, that's all I can say on that point.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the proposed plan on page 165, I believe you indicated that all blue area is going to be the change of use added with the outside facility. So that means the residential element is a lounge, a garage, and 3 bedrooms.
That's right. The first floor plan remains unchanged. So it would be the,
unless they use what's going to be changed to part of the change of use. Is that correct? And plus no toilets downstairs. Unless, again, they use the change of use elements.
It says that the kitchen is going to be as part of the lounge in the change. It's written on page. I can't see which page that is. Where the floor plans are. It's clear on the floor. Upstairs.
sorry.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Edwards and then Councillor.
Thank you. In the documents, page 162, we have a location plan which shows site itself, the neighbouring house, which I believe we've heard an objector, and then a number of other buildings. I believe that those buildings are agricultural, what I can see on Google Maps. But I wonder if you could just confirm that there is only one other property in residential use that would be impacted by this proposal.
The comments from environmental protection didn't specifically identify, but there's only one immediate neighbour that's directly impacted by the outdoor play area.
Thank you.
Councillor Ashwell.
Thank you, Chair. This is regarding the parking and access. The proposal is for 15 car parking spaces. Yet you mentioned there's only 5 members of staff. But in the report also it says 10 spaces would be adequate. So I'm just wondering why there's 15 spaces rather than 10.
So the question was why the 10 spaces are adequate.
Why they've applied for 15 spaces rather than, I would have thought 10 would be ample.
The number of staff wasn't clarified in the application, so it's just stated that there are 5 spaces for staff. So sorry, I'm not clear what the question is.
In the application it says there's going to be 15 parking spaces.
That's right. Yeah.
I just wonder why I need so many.
Why there's so many spaces? Well, to accommodate the drop-off spaces for parents as well. I mean, that's, you know, I don't know why that's what's been applied for.
Thank you.
Any more questions, members? No? Debate. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. While I support the sort of proposal in itself to have a nursery, I think it's a great idea. We do have to look at it on material planning considerations. Unfortunately, development in the countryside and the additional noise impacts to not only residents but to the equestrian services, etc. I think unfortunately outweighs the benefits of the community facility. So I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation in refusing the application.
Councillor Ashwell.
I've actually lived next door to someone who had a nursery from home, and the impact of the noise it had on our family, not being able to use our garden. The noise coming up to the bedroom was just too much to bear, to be honest, so I won't be supporting this application.
Indeed, I think doubtless a need for such a nursery, and we know that nursery places are in very short supply. But this is not a sustainable nor appropriate site, I'm afraid. The aims are laudable of the people who want to set it up, but I'm afraid it's not a suitable premises for this activity. The impact on local residents and other activities locally, and the fact that it's away from sustainable in terms of traffic and so on, access, it just doesn't fit in with our local plan and agreed local policies, so we can't support it, I'm afraid. Any more debate, members? No? Okay, so this application is recommended for refusal. Can I see all those in favour of refusing this application?
8, Chair.
Yes, all members. Thank you very much indeed. So that application is refused. We're now going to move on to the Planning Appeals Quarterly Report. Lorna, are you going to introduce that? Okay, lovely, thank you.
Very much, Chair. On the report today, there's decisions that we've had back from the inspectorate. There aren't any committee decisions actually. If I don't necessarily need to go through all of the decisions that were made, but if there's any that you've seen that you want to ask any questions about, I think points to note is that the statistics are in line with what our aspirations are and our key performance indicators in terms of the ratio between what's allowed and what's been dismissed. So that is good, with the majority being dismissed in line with our recommendations. So that's successful. We've had a couple of the ones that were allowed. We had is item number 4 on it on page 254, which was in respect of our policy DM3, where the inspectorate found that the replacement of a small dwelling, which is less than 120 square metres, we'd recommended refusal because the policy doesn't allow us to go over the threshold of 25% on that, which they did do, but the inspector considered that the fallback position was worse than the proposal and so took that into account. And also there was a number of derelict buildings on the site which this was going to tidy up, so on balance considered that the improvements to the character of the area outweighed the minor impact on the loss of the small dwelling. So that's a policy we have struggled with, and that's something that we've been having long discussions for many years with our strategic planning team to see how we can tighten that up. But it is an improved policy of the previous local plan. We also had NTRA 3 challenged as a policy. This was another one that was allowed, which was item number 5 at Berriton Heath Road. So that's our infill policy in non-defined settlements. In this case, that's Soberton. And the inspector found that the design of the new dwellings was compatible with the general character of the area, and also the village design statement compatible with that. And then lastly, at 10 Castle Rise in Kingsworthy, item number 6, another appeal allowed. In this case, a simple question of looking at the design objectively, whilst the dormers weren't entirely in keeping with the house and the localised character of the area, because none of the other houses in the area have dormers, and that's very obvious when you look at the prevailing character. However, the inspector found that it didn't really have a wider negative impact on the overall area, so allowed the appeal in that case. Are there any questions about any other particular appeals decisions? Okay, I think one final thing, we only had one application for costs which we won. The inspector threw it out. They were trying to argue that we'd acted unreasonably. However, it was about a refusal, whether we told them about it. It was 6 weeks since we said that there was a problem with the application, asked them if they could, wanted to work with us to resolve it. They didn't come back, so we said, if we don't hear from you, we're refusing it. And the inspector found that approach reasonable, and that is our approach that we apply to all our planning applications if we think there's merit to resolving minor issues, really. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lorna. No questions, members, on